webinars to not waste anybody's time if they were, just interested. If you just want to know what it's about, and if it's not what you're looking for, I won't be offended if you step out of the webinar. But really, the 7-second sound bite here is with our product in your task sequence for SCCM here. You add the UIU deployment configuration step to your task sequence, which will be available via drop-down menu here. There are other methods to use our product within the SCCM environment without a task sequence element, but this is what most people do. UIU deployment configuration step here. We select the two packages. We have a small components package that's about 25 megabytes in size. This one is going to be downloaded to each and every machine. And then we have our repository package that's going to live on the distribution points and just be available. It's going to be about 40 to 50 gigabytes in size, and it contains driver support for every machine on planet Earth that we are aware of, that any customers are doing deployments with anyways, and then some. So the idea here is that at this step in the task sequence, our software is going to be downloaded to a machine that's being imaged. It is then going to evaluate that machine as far as what drivers need to go on it. And then it is going to interact with the SMS process and talk to the management point, figure out where our repository package is on the nearby distribution point, and then we're just going to download the drivers from that package that's on the distribution point to the machine that needs them and stage them to the machine. So using the UIU deployment configuration step here, that's it. There's no drivers. You don't have to go out and find drivers. You don't have to deal with them at all. The most you will have to do after setting things up is occasionally open up the UIU plugin manager here and hit update repository. That will update the local UIU repository that you will be hosting that contains all the drivers. It's also going to update the staging instructions for all the different drivers and update for new machines and corrections for old machines and updated older drivers and all that stuff. You just hit one button, that's done. Distribute those updates to your distribution points, and just one step in your task sequence here. So this task sequence would be good for any collection of machines regardless of their makes or models, and you don't have to do any other driver work for it. And yeah, that's the product in a nutshell at this point. Like I said, everything is covered as far as machines out there. The other thing that you're getting with the purchase of the product is unlimited technical support. So your fault, my fault, nobody's fault. Whatever goes wrong as far as drivers are concerned, or of course the software, if you find anything wrong with that, we'll help you with that. But also with the drivers. So you're doing a deployment. You're deploying to some machine that you just got in the door or something like that, and you don't think the drivers are quite right, or maybe there's some like staticky audio or something like that. That's not your problem to solve. That's my problem. So just reach out to us and we will work on getting that corrected. Of course, I'm going to ask for some logs, things like that. But again, you'll have us in your court as far as figuring out what drivers need to be corrected or what the issue is, and help you solve that. So that's what we're going to be working towards here, and the rest of this webinar is going to be how we get to this. Obviously, the UIU deployment configuration step is not a native part of SCCM, so how do we get it installed? And that's going to be the rest of this webinar. Of course, if you have any questions now or throughout this webinar, please feel free to ask those questions. I do have the questions box open on my screen, so I'll keep an eye on that. And although I have been doing these webinars for quite some time now, so I have gotten pretty good at refining the script to answer all of the usual questions. So if I don't get to your question immediately, that's probably because I'm about to cover it in a little bit. This webinar usually doesn't take the full hour, but sometimes it gets pretty close depending on how much I ramble and how many questions people have. So Here we go. Oh, a couple of housekeeping things. If you were interested in that $25 Amazon gift card, there were a couple of prerequisites to be eligible for that. I'm pretty sure everybody in this webinar was signed up with a legitimate business class domain, so that shouldn't be an issue, as well as filling out the question at the end of the webinar. When I close out, a question will pop up. It's 10 questions. It should take you less than a minute to finish. And I believe question 10 of 10 is what was today's keyword? I will throw that out somewhere in the webinar. That is just to weed out uh, the, the scammers and the people that are just interested in the webinar and try to, oh yeah, I'll sign up for it, and then just don't listen at all and have it on in the background and aren't actually interested. So listen for that keyword. All right. With that, opening up the web browser, in order to get the product installed, BigBangLLC.com is where you're going to want to go. Our websites, unlike other companies out there, we don't gate anything behind a user name and login, so you can immediately just go to Downloads and SCCM plugin download. Once there, you'll be able to download the plugin manager and or the UIU driver database. Now, the reason for what I would recommend you do is just download the plugin manager, because we can build the database using the plugin manager locally once you have that. We offer the UIU driver database as a separate download, primarily for those customers who are in totally offline environments, don't have an internet connection in the environment in which they are going to be using this. So they need to walk that driver database in on physical media or other processes. That's what this is for. But really all you're going to need is the plugin manager. Just click on that, and that will open up and allow you to download a small zip file. It's not very big, only 5 megs compressed here. And that, of course, I already had it downloaded there. So you're just going to extract that, and you will end up with a README and the plugin manager. And that's that's really it. That's the extent of the install. And obviously, it's not an install. It's just a utility-style exe. We did this because a lot of admins, are in environments where they have a lot of red tape. They have to get approvals before they even do software updates in some cases. So just having and running an exe, it's literally not an installed application. So there's generally it cuts out a lot of red tape when you just have a utility that you run. Anyways, so remember where you put this is kind of the point here. We're not going to show up in program files or in your programs and features. We're not going to be in an installed application. This exe is going to live wherever you put it. So yeah, once you have it, just double click. The README is going to just redirect you back to our website for any documentation purposes. So we open that up, and welcome to the UIU. You can just copy this and go back here, and that will take you to the user guides section. You can also, of course, just get there from clicking up here. And then we're going to go to the UIU Plugins 2.0 SCCM users. Everything I'm going to cover in today's webinar and more are available between the install guide, and I would put, this really kind of needs to be in quotes here. It's more of a setup guide rather than an install guide, and then a user guide on how to use it. So this is more of the setting up and getting everything configured correctly, and then the user guide is how to actually configure the steps in your task sequence and go through that. The way we designed these is that they are essentially very long HTML files, so you can click on any of the section headers there, and then you can kind of see my scroll bar here on the right side. It's very long. It's just one long file, so you can use your browser's find feature to look for keywords that you're interested in. We also did design it to be in a logical order, so if you start at the beginning and just read it, it will make sense, and it builds on each piece before it. So for those of you that are interested in reading documentation, it should be nice to read and hopefully make sense in the order in which it is presented, but of course you're welcome to skip around there. Or honestly, from watching this webinar, you are going to know the 80% of what you need in order to do everything correctly and get the job done. I wouldn't expect you to even need to read the documentation if you're paying attention to this webinar. So with that, like I said, you double-click UIU PM, and that will open up the plugin manager. In fact, I already had a copy open, but that's all right. So when you open it up for the first time, the very first time on a given machine, you will actually be first presented with this screen, which will ask you for a license key. Now the license key you can get by going back to either under support. It was actually on the download page. There was a link here, request a UIU trial. You can click on that. You can also just navigate under the UIU trial. You'll be clicking on the MEC SCCM plugin and then go to fill out your information here. Now this information that you put here and hit submit, that is going to create a customer entry in our internal customer database. So please use real stuff that you want for us to get a hold of you. Nothing is going to be sold to any third parties. We don't do that. That is against our president's moral principles, and we don't sell anything. We don't even cold call because he hates cold calls out there. So thank you for attending today's webinar. You found us. We didn't. Generally speaking, we don't get to reach out to customers. You have to find us. And with that, in fact, a lot of our customers come from word of mouth, which is always very nice because then they like us going into it. Anyways, fill out your information here, and you will automatically receive an email with a license key in the form of a PDF delivered to your inbox. Whatever you put here in your email is who is going to become the primary contact, which you can change later, and we'll get that PDF that will have the license key. That should come to your inbox pretty quickly. Once you have that in hand, enter that into the license key area here, hit I agree, and then you will end up on the, actually I think it takes you through the welcome wizard first, which is basically just a glorified, hey, please reach out to us to make sure that you know what you're doing with everything, and then eventually dumps you back here at the main screen. Now something that disappeared because I clicked off of it there, if I open up a second copy here, what I want to show you is in the bottom left-hand corner here, you can see the UIU Plugin Manager is up to date, version 2.4.1. If this EXE itself was out of date, and we don't have a need to update this frequently, knocking on wood, it's a pretty solid application right now, so it does not get updated very frequently because we don't need to. But if it ever does have updates available, it's not going to automatically update itself. You'll have to navigate up to the main menu here and go to Update Plugin Manager. And that will just update this EXE itself. Like it will literally, essentially download the latest copy and replace itself wherever you are here. Another perfectly acceptable way to update is to simply go back to our website and go to downloads and download the latest copy. That would also accomplish the same feat. This just makes it a little easier. This update here has no bearing on the actual drivers or the software that is used to install the drivers. This is just the pluginmanager.exe, which is kind of a command and control. It's designed to manage the repository of drivers and facilitate the configuration and installation of the plugin elements for the SCCM task sequence step. So with that, kind of speeding ahead, I'm gonna kind of breeze over some of the other, like the settings here. There's not much in here. If you have a proxy, you can enter proxy information here, click Save and Test, and it will make sure that we can see all the resources we need to see to download our stuff. The Plugin Manager application itself uses multiple threads because when we're doing a repository update, this location, for example, here that I have listed as the UIU repository, this contains the 40 to 50 gigabytes worth of driver files, and those are individual files. All the files are individually compressed and encrypted to make them as small as possible. And when we're evaluating the existing repository to see what we might need to update, we scan through all of those, 100,000 files or whatever it is at this point, and being able to use multiple threads makes that go much quicker. So, but if you were, for example, needing to do updates on a production server in the middle of the afternoon when everybody's using it, and you want to make absolutely certain that we don't use up too many resources, you can shut off multiple threads. It's just an option that was made available. In development, there's also an optional, you can opt into the beta. It's not enabled by default, but this is an update channel for us here in support to use to get customers updates faster. So, for example, let's say you run into a problem with a new machine that came in the door, and one of the drivers wasn't correct or wasn't working correctly, or maybe it was out of date or something like that. Generally speaking, if it's a very simple problem for us to resolve, instead of making you wait for the next full release, we might instead put that update in, or especially if it's something that we're I don't want to say unsure of, but if it's something that we really want to more thoroughly test before we release it to everyone, but we do want to get you moving forward, and I'm confident that this fix is going to work for you, I might publish that to the beta channel, ask you to opt into the beta channel, and then you can download that update without us affecting everybody else that's out there. So it's just a resource for us here in support to use to get updates out to customers faster in cases where that might be needed. Something where I can give you a turnaround time of a couple of hours instead of a couple of days type thing, depending on what the issue might be, of course. So that kind of covers settings. We already went over licensing, and I covered the updating this plugin manager. So moving on to the repository management screen, this is really the main point of this utility, is managing the repository. So when you get to this screen for the first time, you're not actually going to have anything listed in the path, and in order to create a repository, you'll need to click Change Repository and enter in a location that you wish to use to store that 40 to 50 gigabytes worth of driver files that we'll need. Any location that SCCM can see is going to be a valid target. Technically, you can also use a local drive letter if you're installing this on the SCCM primary site server itself, but certainly don't even if that is the case, even if that is where you are storing this, I would still recommend using UNC paths. SCCM prefers them, of course. So yeah, use a network share location that will have at least that amount of space available to be used by us. Generally speaking, you don't need to enter in any credentials here because we're going to be using whatever credentials you're running the plugin manager as. So as long as you can see the location, you don't need to use extra credentials. This is just, again, for those customers that have really tightly controlled environments and need to use a resource, a shared resource that their user that they're logged in as does not have access to use. Like SCCM will be able to use it, but your user can't just willy-nilly go and grab files or update files in that location. Then add those extra credentials here. Most people will never need to add anything in there, but that's what it's there for. As far as once you've done that, at this point you could hit, for most people, you just hit Update Repository, and it will start building a repository from this location. The first thing that it does when you hit Update Repository is it's going to scan the location that you gave us and figure out what is already there, and it will just download the differential. It will just download whatever is missing or not correct. So in the case of a blank directory that you just set up, the differential is going to be the entire thing, so it will just download all of the files that it needs to build a new repository. So some other things that you can do in here, just to go over the different options. Again, if you were one of those customers that were in an isolated environment and you downloaded the full repository from the website, you would then run the plugin manager and click Import Repository. and after you extracted the driver database file that you downloaded from the website, you would then extract that because it would come in the form of a zip file. You'd extract it to another file that would be, I believe it ends in .imp, import file, and then select that and click open, and it will go ahead and import all of the driver files that are in that import file into your repository and set it up correctly. Otherwise, if you have anything resembling a reasonable internet connection, I would still highly recommend doing the online update process. It is going to be overall faster than doing the download and import manually. The sharing button here is just going to open up the properties, File Explorer properties on the path that you chose here. So if you need to update the sharing or security on that location to something that SCCM will be able to see, that can be done quickly and easily there. Custom drivers is kind of a deprecated, or not deprecated, it's a legacy feature that really isn't used very much anymore, so and it's kind of beyond the scope of this webinar anyway, so we're not really going to go over that. Just know that that's a way for us to add drivers to the process that aren't in our database. Generally speaking, we're just going to add any drivers that we can to the database, but there are some rare exceptions where peripheral drivers that you want every single machine in your environment to get. But there's even other ways to do it. Like I said, it's kind of a legacy. It's held over from previous versions of the plugin manager from long ago. But anyways. UIU components, driver database, and driver files are all the ones that are selected by default. This is just granular control that we could give to the customer. So we did give to the customer of, do you want to update the components? Do you want to update the driver database file? So there's if actually we navigate to this location, here, let me, come on, there we go, grab this and go here. You can see the structure of the database. There's AMD64 contains our copies of UIU Prep, which is the application that's going to run in Windows PE, do all the heavy lifting. Inside of the directory labeled repository is going to be where all the driver files are broken out into their file repository format. As it so happens, a lot of drivers contain the same libraries and the same co-installers across multiple different types of drivers. So one of the ways that we can keep our driver database as small as possible is to take one file, store a file once and associate it with many drivers instead of doubling up on all those different files. Anyways, this UDB file here that you'll see in here, this one's obviously very outdated. This is I should probably update my this is my webinar environment, so I should probably update it, but haven't in a while. So the latest UDB is going to be from a couple of days ago, so it'll be 24.05.17, and this is the catalog file. You can see it's only about 25 megabytes in size, but this contains all of the instruction sets for how and where and when to use what drivers. In fact, I do have small repository. That one I updated, I think. Yeah, 24.05.14 was one of the last ones that we released here. And again, so you're going to collect these UDB files as you do updates, and each new UDB that we release contains new instruction sets for new drivers. It may or may not involve downloading a new driver. In some cases, we do occasionally do releases where we were just updating instruction sets for drivers and not actually adding new drivers, just corrections for how and when they stage to what machines. But those can also include driver updates as well. Anyways, whether or not that UDB driver, that UDB file is downloaded is controlled by this driver database control here. Again, there's no real reason why your average customer is going to have any reason to uncheck these. In fact, driver files, there's, as far as I can tell, there's, other than for testing purposes, there's no reason to ever uncheck driver files. This would prevent the actual driver files from being downloaded. So it would update everything else except the driver files, and then you could go into your log, the UIU plugin manager log, and see what files would have been downloaded. So that would be a use case for that. But Generally speaking, these ones just always leave them on unless one of us here in support gives you a reason to uncheck these. Um, and that's going to be a very specific support-related reason and probably not something that's going to last very long because we're going to correct whatever's wrong. CRC validation here is for, so as I mentioned before, all of the driver files that are in the repository are individually compressed and encrypted, and that happens when they go into the database here on our end. So, I get a driver from NVIDIA or from Intel or wherever, and we add it to our database to update support for machines that need those drivers. When when those files go into the database, it's compressed and encrypted, and it's not decompressed or decrypted until it's actually on the machine that it's going to be installed in. So it remains compressed and encrypted all the way through until it gets downloaded to the machine. At this step in the task sequence, that file will get downloaded to that local machine, and 5 seconds before it gets staged to the machine, that's when UIU prep will decrypt it and decompress it. So any monkey business in transit, and it will not decompress or decrypt. So this is a way. Now that can also happen for a number of reasons besides anyone trying to tamper with it. There are DFS things, and there's all manner of different reasons why. Occasionally a file could become corrupt or have a bit changed or something like that. So if there's any problems with that, turning on CRC validation during the update process will add an extra hash checking process to our update process that will make absolutely certain that every single file in the repository is bit for bit correct. Generally speaking, we don't need to do that. It does add an extra 10 or 15 minutes to the update process. Typically speaking, for most customers, the regular update process without this turned on works just fine. And what we're going to be doing during that update process, just looking to make sure that the file is present, that it's labeled correctly, and it is the correct size that we expect it to be. So that's what CRC validation is. And then cleanup is something that only does anything if you've also removed UDBs from the database. So one of the things I pointed out before, so for example here I have 2 UDBs. As you continue to do updates, we don't remove any of the older UDBs. And that's for support related reasons, like if you update to something and something stops working, a machine that was imaging just fine all of a sudden is not imaging just fine, that gives you an easy rollback to a previous version. In fact, it happens so quickly you don't even have to redistribute anything. So let's say you updated to the latest UDB, you distributed that out to the distribution points, and something went wrong. A machine's not imaging that it was imaging. In order to roll back, let's say this was my task sequence here, all I would have to do is go driver UDB name and then type in the previous version that we had, and hit apply. And as soon as I hit apply, that's going to take effect with the very next deployment that occurs. So there's no need to do any type of package updates or anything. You simply type this in with the specific database that you want to start using and hit apply, and it happens immediately. So that's a nice, I particularly like that feature for having that rollback available should anything go wrong. Otherwise, the logic of UIU prep is just to use the latest database that's available. So whenever you do updates, it will automatically start using the new database. You don't have to manually do that. But as you collect these as you continue to do updates and you collect these UDB files, really keeping the latest one and like a last known working database is all that you need to keep. Anything that's older, it would be good to just delete those UDBs because they're not really going to be useful anymore. And every time you do updates, though, the plugin manager is going to make sure that all of the UDBs in your repository have all of the drivers that they need in order for that version of the database to have a successful deployment. So if I update a driver, for example, in the latest database, we've updated drivers. My database is going to be bigger because I'm going to have older drivers being still in the in the repository here. That are needed in order to support this older version of the database. If I were to get rid of this UDB and then run updates with the cleanup feature, any of those old drivers that aren't going to be used when doing a deployment with the newer version, any of those older drivers are going to get pruned out. Of course, we're going to keep all of the drivers that are needed to do this deployment. It's just going to prune out the unnecessary drivers. So it's good to have this checked. Like I said, it's not going to do anything unless you've removed a UDB, though. But it's also not it's not checked by default because it's not strictly speaking necessary, and maybe you don't want to run that extra process every time. As well, this plugin manager can be run from command line, so script updates will give you an example of how to run this from the command line. The idea here is that you could set this up as a scheduled task or otherwise part of a script or something like that that you want to run on a regular basis. It works particularly well in conjunction with if you want to do a set it and forget it type situation where you have your UIU repository package and you set this up to do an update distribution point, let's say every Friday evening at at midnight or something like that. Then you might want to run the UIU update process a couple hours before that to make sure that that's ready for that update process to take effect. Then you don't have to ever manually open this and run updates. With that basically covers everything in the repository management section. The advanced repository management, so this is where for some customers this is us helping customers customize our process to their environment. So in some cases, let's say you have a remote site that doesn't have a distribution point, and you don't want those machines pulling down drivers over a WAN network that's super long and super has a lot of latency. You could set up a local share at that remote site, for example, and let's say it was this one here, and I can not only maintain the driver repository that's local here, but I could maintain a driver repository at that remote site. And what I could do here is set that up, maintain that separate repository from my other repository, and then when I'm in the same area here, I could also add package path and enter in that location. And now UIU prep during this task sequence will also consider that network share as a potential repository to draw from. So if I have this repository package still here, we are still going to ask the management point where our package is, but if that's farther away than this location, then we'll go ahead and use this location. So it just gives us some more flexibility in how to and where to source our drivers from for customers. So you can use it as a supplementation to the distribution network that SCCM does. I do also have some customers that completely supplant it, and they might set up if they only have a few different sites in their environment. If you have 70 distribution points, having you still probably want to use the SCCM network. It's easier to manage those distribution points. But if you only have 7 and you don't want to distribute that package, we could easily set up those 7 repositories here, and then we can update them all at the same time and keep them up to date that way. As well, the advanced repository management feature also then gives you access to the discovery tool ability of UIU. So that 40 to 50 gigabytes driver files in some cases, especially a use case here would be you're doing offline deployments to a particular site. You're putting it on physical media like a USB, and you're sending it to that location for them to do imaging. You don't need all 40, 50 gigabytes on that USB. You only have like 6 machines at that location. What you could do here is scan a representative machine of each of those 6 machines. We'll grab a scan file and add that to this process. In fact, actually, if I run the analyze here, on this location. I believe my small repository here is one. Yeah, so I ran one scan file, and it is a virtual machine. It contains 141 virtual devices, and because of that, the size of the database was reduced down to almost nothing. So not very many driver files at all for that one. So we can make the driver database very small for, if this was a real machine, this would be probably 3 to 4 gigabytes in size, even for one machine. But typically speaking, if you just have 6 machines at that location, we could bring that database down from 40, 50 down to 5 or 6. Much more manageable to put on a USB that way. Anyways, that's what that is, and that's what that's for. And then lastly, really here in the plugin manager is actually getting the plugin elements into SCCM. Now, at this point, you would need to everything I've shown you so far as driver management and updating this repository and all this does not need to be done on the primary site server. This can be done from any machine that can see the location you need to update and can see the internet there. But at this point, at least once, we do need to run the plugin manager on the primary site in order to inject our plugin elements. And by plugin elements, I am specifically referring to a DLL file that needs to be placed for the local admin console to be able to interact with our step in the task sequence. And then we do compile a MOF to update, create and update a class in WMI underneath the SCCM node so that we can add our step to the task sequence here. As well as this is the area where, at least once a year, you're going to come in here and update your license key. So in this case, you can see that I need to update my license key here because I have entered the latest license key here is the one that I entered into this licensing screen, but the one that's in use in my task sequences is the slightly older one. So I would need to, at this point, then click Install Plugin, but it would tell me to close the Configuration Manager, and then I would update, and that would get up to date. I'm not going to do that right now, just because I don't want to wait for this to reopen. So, it is not important for this webinar. Okay, so once you've done that and you've installed that, for new customers, installing this for the very first time, click Install Plugin. The library, the next screen will just ask you if you want to do both the library and the MOF, or just one or the other, or both. Just select both, click OK, and that process will take 5 seconds because we're literally just compiling a MOF and placing a DLL file in the correct place. That's it for our process here. Once that's done, you can reopen the Configuration Manager client or Configuration Manager console here, and at that point, you will be able to navigate to your task sequences, and any task sequence that you might want to add us to is great. As far as positioning of the and then of course you'll be able to add the Universal Imaging Utility UIU Deployment Configuration step from the Add drop-down menu here. As far as placement in the task sequence, we absolutely have to be after the Apply Operating System step because we need to have an OS imaged to the machine in order to affect its driver store, of course, and before the Setup Windows and Configuration Manager step that reboots the machine back into Windows setup. We have to happen before this step, but after the Apply Operating System step. Anywhere in between here is going to be good, and you can and should replace whatever you are currently doing for drivers, and don't need to delete it. Maybe just disable it until you can verify that our stuff is doing what we advertise it to do. And at that point, this should be the only step that you need for driver-related items. As far as configuring is concerned, the hybrid method is For most people running SCCM, you're doing your deployments using the one of the download methods, um, and that's fine. You should do that. Do the hybrid method. As far as selecting packages are concerned, let's go over that real quick. So to set up the UIU packages, it's real simple. We're just going to right-click, maybe make an organizational container over here. We're going to click Create Package, and we're going to label it something relevant, like UIU components, for example. And then this package contains source files. Actually, let's show you the repository first. So UIU repo in this case. We're going to browse, and we're going to select a location. And for this one, I'm literally going to go back into my repository manager, and I'm going to copy and paste whatever I used, UIU repository. This is the repository. We're going to put that here, and we're going to click OK. Next, do not create a program. That is what our step in the task sequence is for. We do not need SCCM to execute this for us, especially since these aren't really going to work in Windows PE anyways. And then you're going to click Next, Next, and OK. Enable Nomad if you are also a Nomad customer. We need to natively work with the 1E Nomad alternate content distribution network that you can set up using that product. We have worked with 1E specifically to make our product work with theirs. So if you are using that, no worries. And with that, yeah, once you've added that, just distribute it as you normally would. So for the repository, the only thing that you'll need to adjust in here is that we do need, for the full repository of drivers, to add this copy the content in this package, show package share on distribution points. This is what allows us to pull down just the drivers that we need from the distribution point, instead of having to download the whole 40 gigabyte package to each and every machine that's part of the deployment. That would not be an efficient use of bandwidth, so make sure that you turn this on. And generally speaking, it's good to turn it on prior to distributing the package, so that SCCM does both those things at the same time. If you distribute it and then turn it on afterwards, I've noticed that sometimes it can take several hours before SCCM gets around to actually creating that share and putting the content there. Your mileage may vary. So with that, and then the other one is the components package. To create that, again, you're just going to go to Create Package. You're going to label it something relevant, and then we're going to, this package contains files, source folder. We're going to go to the same location that we did before, except we're going to go one directory deeper into the one labeled components. And that, to show you what that looks like here, is there's another directory that's going to be in your repository labeled components, and that's going to contain copies of UIU prep in there as well. So the idea here is that this location is very small, and 25 megabytes there, and is going to be downloaded to each and every machine, whereas the full repository is going to be left on the distribution point. So with that, and then same thing, do not create a program, next, 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 okay. And now you've got a components and a full repository. The components one, you don't need to add that, copy the content in the package share on that one. Okay, with that, we've created our tasks, our packages, going back to the task sequence. And actually, before I jump back into here, let me give you, since we're getting close to the end of the webinar here, let me give you that keyword. Today's keyword is going to be crown. C-R-O-W-N, crown, is today's keyword. Enter that into question 10 on the survey that will pop up at the end for to be eligible for that $25 Amazon gift card. Okay, with that, so we come back into the UIU deployment configuration step here, and then what we're going to do is click Browse for the components package, and then, of course, select components package, and then browse for the repository package, select the repository package, and then you're going to click OK, and that's it. And then this task sequence is now going to be ready for any collection of machines, regardless of their makes or models. During the task sequence here, again, after the apply operating system step and anything before this, when the UIU deployment configuration runs, it's going to look like any other step in the test sequence. We use the same interface as the SMS process, so it will just look like any other step in your task sequence. We're going to download our components package. We're going to run UIU prep locally on that machine that's running this task sequence. It will scan the local machine. It will figure out what drivers it needs for that machine. It will then talk to the SMS network and pull down just the drivers that it needs from that distribution point and stage them to the offline OS before handing the process back to SCCM to continue doing whatever else. Then once it gets to the setup windows and configuration manager step, it will go through its usual device driver setup, and it will have all of the drivers available for that process to finish doing what it needs to do to complete that process. And of course, as part of this, all the usual things, hard disk controllers and things like that, those get staged to the correct location in the Windows system so that they're loaded first when that image starts. So if you have RAID configurations or any type of things like that, those will be available for that machine to use. As far as drivers are concerned, you're going to be getting drivers from the original equipment manufacturers or the vendors, like whoever is the original author of a driver is where we go to. We don't affect any driver signatures or anything like that. So as far as that's concerned, everything is signed by everything that's installed is signed by their respective creators, authors. You'll be getting the latest drivers from manufacturers and vendors. As far as driver selection is concerned, like what drivers get put to what machines, that is an automated process. We do have some level of control over that. So that's where, if we add a driver to the database and it's, good for all of these machines, and then a customer comes back later on and says, hey, this driver, isn't actually good for this machine, we can go in and manually adjust the staging instructions to exclude that machine in particular. But for the most part, we do have a small environment that we test in at Big Bang, usually about 50 machines, give or take, depending on the quarter and how many machines, and all kinds of different factors depend on how many machines that we test with here. We do have a couple of large customers too that have basically every single machine in their environment, so some of those customers we work with very closely. They are used to our product. They've been using us for a long time, and they're very happy with it, but anytime they run into a problem, we're quick to solve it because we solve it for them and we solve it for everyone.